for coming. Thanks for coming. I am delighted to be here. I am delighted to do this book review by Will Haygood, The Butler, A Witness to History. It is only 96 pages. Will Haygood's book entitled The Butler, A Witness to History, is a mesmerizing inquiry into the life of Eugene Allen, a butler who ignited a nation's imagination and inspired a movie, Lee Daniels' The Butler, the highly anticipated film that stars 6 Oscar winners, including Forrest Whitaker, Oprah Winfrey, Jane Fonda, Cuba Gooding Jr., Vanessa Redgrave, and Robin Williams, as well as Oscar nominees Terrence Howard, Mariah Carey, John Cusack, Lynn Crass, James Marsden, David Oyelowo, Alex Pettyfer, Alan Richmond, and Lev Schreiber. That's quite a cast. Just those names sent me to the movie. I was talking to someone about the movie, and by the way, I'm going to limit my presentation to this book, The Butler, with some aspects of the movie. Will Haygood invited us to come with him all the way back to the autumn of 2008 on the campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he was doing his job working for the Washington Post, reporting the presidential campaign of then Senator Barack Obama, when he got a hunch that he was seeing the makings of a president that hunch, if true, would be a precedent-shattering event that would reverberate all over the world. Well, this Democratic candidate was an African American, and he was in North Carolina, a southern state, moving the audience to their feet and receiving applauses from everywhere. Question. Would the United States of America elect an African American as its first president? Mr. Will Haygood, acting upon that hunch that Barack Obama would be elected president of the United States, convinced his editor to let him pursue his dream of finding a black man who had worked in the White House, maybe as a butler, over several decades, where he was an eyewitness to history. What a dream. Could this be true? Could there be such a man? And could this man, who was serving tea and coffee during the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the many other events that shook the world, still be alive? And if so, this butler would have been an eyewitness to history. Could an investigative reporter, such as our writer, locate him? This was the way that it all began. And one man, our writer, used his skills, not only as a writer, but as an investigative reporter, to find Eugene Allen, the butler. Then it happened. After all those phone calls, bad leads, leading to nowhere, here at last was a voice on the other end of the line. It was Eugene Allen, the White House butler. And when our writer, Mr. Haygood, used public transportation, got off of the bus and walked sidewalk to go to Mr. and Mrs. Allen's home, and while going there, made observations about the neighborhood. I was very impressed. He had not forgotten from whence he came. He was a true Buckeye. And he looked at it and it reminded him of his home in Columbus, Ohio. The same kind of house that he was reared in by his grandparents. And he had not forgotten his manners and how he was reared. And you could see that kindness and care that he was able to convey not only to me as a reader as he greeted these wonderful people, but they were in the twilight of their years. Here he was more than a reporter, knowing that he had the story. But he was a young man, now a reporter, remembering his grandparents. We saw love and kindness in this man. Mr. and Mrs. Allen greeted Will as if he was a lost relative, and they bonded immediately. You got the feeling that Mr. Allen, especially Mrs. Allen, if you had seen the movie, was still full of vinegar, and you could see that she was an adorable person. And if you saw the movie where Oprah Winfrey played the part, you know that she really captured Mrs. Allen. My early criticism of the book was that Will Hager did not tell so much about the physical description of Mr. and Mrs. Allen and others. But as I read on, I could see why. Mrs. Allen said, "Show him the pictures." And this old man said, "I'll do that." And he walked down those creepy steps where there was almost no light. And he got to the foot of the stairs, and he reached up. There was a string there, and he pulled that string, and the lights came on. And what a scene it was. Photos from everywhere. All of the presidents. And him and his wife photographed, not only at the White House, but also in social affairs. And yes, Mrs. Allen was not only feisty, she was a beautiful woman. And you could see why I said that I wish he had described her, because even as an old lady, she was still a very attractive person. These photos captured them in many various places and events. Here they were, a young, handsome people who loved one another, and they loved life to its fullest. There's a saying, one picture is worth 1,000 words. And the book had a section of photos of the Allens, and yes, you will see that Mrs. Allen was an elegant and beautiful woman. And Mr. Allen was a handsome and exuded confidence. I think that Forrest Whitaker, if you saw the movie, really portrayed the Butler in all the ways that Mr. Allen lived his life. This fine couple lived alone in their old neighborhood and viewed TV and had lots of fun. They were the proud parents of one son. Notice I said one son, named Charles. Charles was a graduate of Howard University, and he was a Vietnam veteran. And he returned home intact. And now is employed with the United States government, the Department of State, as an investigator. Charles does look in on his parents and watched over them. So Will Hager was able to presidential election, and it was no secret. They were going to vote for Barack Obama. Sad to say, Mrs. Allen died in her sleep Sunday, 2 days before the election. Mr. Allen related his loss to Will Hager by phone. He said, "She's gone." And Hager said, "Where?" He was thinking that maybe she was in the hospital. And finally said, "She's dead." He said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to vote." And though he cast only one vote, I believe that one vote counted for his wife also. What a moment. This old man who had waited a lifetime to finally vote for a man that, with things being equal, could have been his boss, the President of the United States. Mrs. Helene Allen was buried the same day, November 7, 2008, that the article appeared in the Washington Post. The title of this article was, "A Butler Well Served by This Election." A moment of personal thought. My grandson, aged 9 years and 1/2, lives in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and was visiting his grandparents last week, Maurice and Betty Thornton. That's Betty Thornton right there. And he loves to read. And he reads well. And I persuaded him without much difficulty to read a portion of this book, The Butler. And I like the way he said it, Barack Obama. And he read it. And the part that he read, that he seemed to like most, in the portion of the book, he was impressed with the letters that poured in from all over the world about that article, "A Butler Well Served by This Election." He enjoyed the read, meaning my grandson, and I am sending him a copy of the book this weekend. Chris Wan Reading gave me the first lift that I needed for this book. But this book may have been only 96 pages, and it has a lot of pictures in it, I might add. But it was, and it's an easy read, but it was difficult for me. And let me tell you why. Well, as I read it, it caused me to visualize. This visualization process caused me to think about the fact that I was on a plane out of Kennedy Airport about the time that then Senator Obama was in Chapel Hill, and seated right next to me in the plane was a volunteer for the Obama campaign, who had come all the way from Paris, France, and he was enthusiastic to help in the campaign. And he was going to Chapel Hill and all a part of North Carolina to help get the vote out. A friend of mine, a neighbor, Joe Raggio, who volunteered his time and spent 2 months in the Cleveland, Ohio area, also getting out the vote. Earlier that year, I was interviewed by a Time Warner reporter about a black, Barack Obama, becoming President of the United States, and did I feel that it would happen? My comments were televised locally. Those excursions back in time were real to me. I am a retired university professor. I taught the history of the American Civil Rights Movement for 10 years. I also was a participant in the Civil Rights Movement. I found myself visualizing and musing about those periods of my life. And I kind of got away from this book for just a while. My grandson brought it back. Isn't it nice to have a grandson? Perhaps I should share two other events about Eugene Allen. He continued to live in his home. His son Charles came by more often. An invitation was extended from the White House for Mr. Will Haygood, Eugene Allen, and Charles to sit in the VIP section for the inauguration of the president. President Barack Obama. Those were exciting times. And another to personalize again, my two daughters and my niece who lives in Chicago and my nephew who lives in Atlanta all went down there to see President Barack Obama become the first African American president. We who were in this area went to Normanskill Country Club and saw on a big screen the inauguration. That inauguration brought hundreds of thousands of people to Washington, D.C., including Will Haygood, Mr. Allen, and his son Charles. That walk in the cold winter was a torture, but Mr. Allen was never happier. Yes, it was cold. People who came back talked about how cold it was in Washington, D.C. at that time. This old man did the walk all the way from the train station. And he sat down in the VIP section, and he was the happiest man alive. In the second week of March 2010, Eugene Allen was admitted to Providence Hospital. And it was there on March 31st that he took his last breath. On April 8, 2010, Eugene Allen was funeralized at Greater First Baptist Church, and several hundred people came to bid Eugene Allen farewell. There were many flowers that draped his casket, including one from the President of the United States. Many of the people there were former co-workers, and some were friends, and others were people who had learned about this great man. They were there to say goodbye to him. It was, as President Obama said, quite an American story. A young man who had fled a southern plantation, who had made his way to the nation's capital, who had witnessed the tumult and glory of change from a unique position, who had crossed from one century to the next while working for 8 presidents, and let's name them. Harry S. Truman, and I wish he had remembered to include that he also worked for Harry S. Truman, who signed the executive order that integrated the armed forces. So if I have a criticism of what was left out, it would be that. Harry S. Truman, Dwight David Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Richard Milhouse Nixon, Jerry Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan, perhaps his favorite president. But Nancy Reagan invited him to a state dinner with his wife. And that was the photo that was in his living room when Will Haygood visited the home. All the rest were in the basement, but that one was right there in the living room. He loved Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. What was his politics? He never mentioned his politics. But he voted for Barack Obama. man lived to see the once unimaginable, the swearing in of a black president. Did I like the book? Yes, I did. This was a wonderful read. Real Haygood is such an engaging writer, and he shares so much and captures the readers in ways that is intoxicating. Is it a book for the young? I would say yes. My grandson was mesmerized by it. And as I mentioned before, I am sending him a copy. What about the movie? Well, they go together. They go together. The screenwriter had to invent a second son and utilize the historic father versus son episodes to bring in some extra drama to highlight the inner struggle of the butler. But all of us have had to make decisions that our parents were adverse to. It's true for me as it was for my father. Did I like the movie? How in the world can one be so lucky as to go to a movie and see 6 Oscar winners and such talent in one movie? We did. We saw the movie. We saw The Butler. And it was exciting. The genius behind the excellent story, and it is a true story, is Will Haygood. He was like a mystery writer. Mr. Haygood let the reader be a part of that wonderful journey to explore, find, love, admire, and appreciate and illuminate a wonderful patriot, Eugene Allen, and be a part of his greatness, and to see the world acknowledge his greatness. It was an excellent read. I commend you to, if you haven't, to read The Butler. Thank you very much. And I am available for questions. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for the talk, and you've succeeded in making me want to read the book.
Good.
I did have some questions about, I'm not sure what Butler did in the White House.
Come again?
I'm not sure what he actually did in the White House. Did he actually meet people like Gorbachev and all the various dignitaries who came through, or what did he do?
Let me put the question back. Anyone see the movie? Does anyone see Forrest Whitaker in his role as the butler and some of the things he did? Would you share with him what the movie said that the butler did?
So I'm going to want to raise my hand. I
You didn't
can't
read?
remember. I'm sorry.
You don't remember?
No.
What he did is what Butler did. What he didn't do was socialize, except at the time, I think, to go to the state dinner, at which point he became a firm fan of Ronald Reagan, a point which I disagree with, obviously, but that was his view. And if I had been in his position, I probably would have felt similarly. That said, I think he had the opportunity, though, to learn a lot about the personal side of the presidency. Other people didn't get to know. I think he had personal interactions. I don't know whether the book, Maurice, does the book reflect much of the personal interactions?
It did. Dwight David Eisenhower took the butler with him to Gettysburg. He became a friend of many of the presidents, above and beyond his job description. His role as the butler, he poured the tea, the coffee, in intimate settings where they were pouring over and musing over things that could not be taken away from the White House. That was one of the big things that he as a butler was. He could not bring any of that information back to his wife, Helene. He could not bring it back to his friends. He could not write a book, as you know, people tend to write books now. All of this he kept a secret when they were debating the civil rights movement, when Dwight David Eisenhower was poring over the fact of whether to send troops down to Little Rock to make sure that those black kids that would integrate in the Central High School in Little Rock was not killed, because that's what they were going to do, is mob violence. Eisenhower made the unprecedented decision. It had not happened since Reconstruction, to send federal troops down south to Little Rock to protect those children. I happen to know a couple of them who were part of the Little Rock Nine. Okay, he served little parties for the Kennedy's children, who were at that time the only children of that size that had been in the White House. He went back to the White House after John F. Kennedy had been assassinated and spent time there with Mrs. Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy gave him a tie and a clamp. He was there during all of those periods. And this is what the book was about. How could a man, after they were discussing, especially during the period in which Kennedy became president, the civil rights area, and not speak about it, not go home. His neighbors were inflamed about what was taking place with the freedom rides on the buses. They were, like all neighborhoods, really concerned about, would the president take action, or would he just let it happen? The sit-ins at the lunch counters in North Carolina, those are the kinds of things that he had to just keep his mouth closed. He couldn't go back and say, well, my president decision. When Mr. Eisenhower was Mr. Reagan was very slow at making a decision about South Africa and the manner in which the South Africans were treating their black citizens. Yes, you raise your hand?
Yeah, I wanted to add something. When I said he did what butlers do, I didn't mean to be flippant. What I did mean was that he had the responsibilities that would be ordinarily ascribed to a butler, but that the confidentiality, which was the essential part that I think has just been alluded to, was a critical element. And also not voicing his own opinion in a way that could have gotten him in hot water on his job, must have sometimes been a little testy. But in the movie, I think one of the things that was very interesting to me was the relationship challenge that it posed for his wife. I don't know if the book ever talked about that, but he spent so much time at the White House that it really became a strain in their marriage as it was related in the movie. And I think that's the thing that seems very likely, but I don't know whether it was reflected in the book. Was that reflected in the book at all?
No, it did not show any infidelity on her part.
I mean, how much time he was away.
Yeah, it did talk about how much time he was away. There were times when he was away a lot. There were times when he got on the Air Force One to serve the president and come back on Air Force One. There were times when limousine came to his home to pick him up for trips. He was in demand. He wasn't just an ordinary employee. He was an extraordinary person, and that was what Will Hager was trying to show, that he wasn't just an employee who was there. His ear was right there in the action, and he was there. And because of the circumstances, it was not appropriate for him to speak what went on. He had to blend into the woodwork, and he did extremely well. As the movie shows so well that Forrest Whitaker did it so well. Question? Yes, sir.
Putting his own politics aside, just a guess as to why he may have favored President Reagan so much is because both the president and White House staff, including the head of the White House staff, who would have been the butler.
Well, I would agree. There's something charming about Ronald and Nancy that goes beyond politics. Yes.
I'm thinking about the drama in that movie version where the son had a conflict with his father, that he felt his father was something of a quote-unquote Tom, and that the son was more militant, and he wanted his father to be more like him. Do you recall that part?
Well, there was
It's
only
a
one.
kind of generational conflict.
I think I mentioned a generational conflict, and that was Lee Daniels and his group pulled together to give it that kind of universality of father versus son. And by the way, that was not a son. That was a part of the imagination pulled together to give something special to the movie. He had only one son, Charles, who's still around. And he died and had two grandsons that survived him, a son and two grandchildren. I like that movie. I like that part of it. It's
But it was made up. They didn't really have a conflict.
but that was a part of the imagination.
Oh, okay.
No, this young man loved his father, the real son, and in fact the movie showed that the imaginary son loved his father. He didn't like the way his father was not going out on the limb. It also showed the feistiness of the mother when she confronted the son and his girlfriend. Everyone remember that scene? And she's talking about Sidney Poitier. She was in trouble. Okay. Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. What was the relation, I didn't get it, I haven't read the book or haven't seen the movie. What was the relationship between the article that was written and the actual impetus for the book?
As I remember it, Will Haygood took those excursions that he wrote the book about all around this Butler. Things were happening. The world, Hollywood as an example, had just about boycotted all of the black actors and actresses, and you could not see them. You saw them just for a short time in the movies, and all of a sudden you didn't see them at all. And Will Haygood and Lee Daniels and that group felt that Hollywood was not fair to black performers, and he listed them in this book. All of those actors, only Sidney Poitier and a few others were able to make the movies. In the olden days, Rochester, a few others, if somebody remembers, the manner in which blacks who did make the movie were portrayed. Hattie McDaniel, who's a great actress, was given a role that did not complement her race. Okay? And Gone with the Wind. And he also talked about The Birth of a Nation, which came out the same year that the Butler was born. And The Birth of a Nation was not a favorable movie to this country or to African Americans. It seemed to want to extol the KKK and make it look like it was something special rather than a terrorist organization. Question? Yes.
Yeah. If it's all right to take another whack at the question.
Sure.
You mentioned two movies. There's another movie called Glory, and one of the famous Civil War historians opined that if you wanted to understand what the Civil War was like, you'd better watch Glory and never watch Gone with the Wind. And I was wondering if the movie Glory, which starts off with a soldier riding a horse with a sword, cutting watermelons in half. And that was symbolic, according to this historian, of what was happening then. All these preconceptions, which are stupid and wrong, just being destroyed. I was wondering if the movie Glory is mentioned in the book, since they talk about the other movies.
Well, I think I've mentioned the fact that if I had a criticism of Will Haygood, it's the fact that he left out the military part of life, and he did not stress that at all. And that's a pet bias of mine. I think the integration of armed forces did a great deal to lift America to the height that it's finally attained. But it needed the civil rights movement to really make it happen, and people changing. But no, Glory was not mentioned.
I'll read the book anyway.
I'll send you Glory. Question?
This follows up a little bit on your last comment, sir. After reading a 96-page book, did you feel satisfied, or were you kind of wishing that there had been more?
Oh, as I mentioned, I thought I was quite satisfied. It was a good read, and I gave some reasons why it was a good read and why it also caused me to ponder and move away from the book. And I also mentioned that my grandson gave me that extra lift to get back to the book. It's an excellent book, and I would encourage children and grown-ups alike to read it. It tells about contemporary life in America, and it ends with, in a sense, it ends with a funeral. Seemingly just a common, ordinary man that was extraordinary, who was right there in the seat of power and did his job wonderfully well. And the send-off was the American people recognized it, and he voted for the first African-American president who became the first African-American president, and it was moving to him. Can you imagine what it's like for an 88-year-old man to be walking in Washington, D.C. during that particular time when it was cold as all get out, and you had to go through, even though you had a VIP pass, to get there, you go through that tunnel and fight all of those people to finally get to your seat. And then you got to walk back. And he loved every moment of it. He did not complain. He did not say, I need a cab. He walked just like the rest of the people. He asked for no quarters. He did his job, and he did it well. And I said, may he rest in peace. Thank you.